What's it like to represent the people of Connecticut? For Connecticut Public, I'm Frankie Graziano. This is the Wheelhouse, the show that connects politics to the people. We got your weekly dose of politics in Connecticut and beyond right here. Connecticut Senate President Pro Tem Martin Looney has spent decades shaping state policy and leading Democrats in the General Assembly. Earlier this month, the New Haven lawmaker announced he will not seek re-election after 23 terms in office. Looney's career has spanned multiple governors, economic downturns, public health crises, and deeply polarized national politics. This hour, we're talking with him and Senator Tony Hwang of Fairfield, who will also not seek re-election this fall. Later in the show, we're going to talk with another former Republican lawmaker, Len Fasano, about whether bipartisanship still has a place in the political arena. So we got Looney, Fasano, Hwang. What a great hour we're going to have, about 80 years of experience combined. But first, Senator Martin Looney joins us right now. Senator Looney, so good to have you here today.
Good morning, Frankie. Great to be with you.
Folks, if you have a question, a quick question for Senator Looney or anything that you'd like to discuss with us here today, what does it take to be a lawmaker in 2026? Maybe what you think out there. Be quick. Give us a call. 888-720-9677. Senator Looney, 34 years as a member of the Connecticut State Senate. Tack on another 12 as House lawmaker. Why did now feel like the right time to step away?
Well, after 46 years and 23 elections, there's never an ideal time, but I just came to believe, and my wife has believed this for a while longer than I have, that it's the time to move on. And as my law partner, Jack Key, said, it's always better to jump before you're pushed, and which is a good way of putting it, I think. And also better to leave while there are more people encouraging you to stay than wishing you would leave.
More people are apt to push nowadays. It's getting a little heated there in the Connecticut General Assembly, but you served under multiple governors. I won't ask you which one was your favorite, but multiple different political eras here in Connecticut, I guess, is the point. When you look back, what stands out to you about the institution you entered versus the one you're leaving?
Well, when I entered as a state representative in 1981, technology was, of course, so different. No cell phones, no texts, no emails. People would communicate with their legislators either by a phone message or a letter. And at the time, there were banks of telephone booths in the hallways outside the House chamber. And if you wanted to call someone, you had to leave the chamber, use one of those booths. Or if you wanted to get a message, there were telephone company operators there who would bring a message into you in the chamber, and then you'd go out and return the call. So what a different world that was.
Susan Raff comes on the show often. As you know her, she works at WFSB News Channel 3, and she always talks about the SNET ladies and how they all sort of were such an institution at the Capitol. When you're telling me about the phone bank, that's who I'm thinking about, the SNET
That's right.
ladies.
They were wonderful. There was a woman named Edwina Clawhusy was the leader of the group, and she was just so kind and gracious and generous. And did
she bring candy to you all? As I understand it, maybe there was something that she brought to you all at the especially on the opening of the legislature. Maybe.
Oh yeah, there were often little treats that that's what made it all so gracious and kind.
Well, that's really cool that happened, but I bring that back because today Susan Raff is doing that on the opening day of the legislature sometimes. So I want to ask you about some of your proudest accomplishments during your tenure. Can you tell us about that?
Well, going back in my early years in the House, one of the things I worked on was plant closing legislation. That was important to require companies that were closing operations in Connecticut to give 6 months notice to their workers when that was happening. Then, of course, we had the big battle in 1991 during my last term in the House about the adoption of the state income tax. Yeah. Unfortunately, the way that worked out at the time, we had the votes in the House for a more progressive income tax, but the only income tax that could pass the state Senate at the time was a flat rate of 4.5%. So we had to adopt that. And what we've been doing ever since is trying to build more progressivity into our income tax rates. And we've had a great deal of success with that. So now most people pay a blended rate where certain amounts of income are taxed at different levels and different tiers. And we were able to lower the bottom two tiers a couple of years ago so that now we have at the lower and middle ends a very moderate income tax. Our problem is that the highest rate of the income tax at 6.99% is capped at such a level that it leaves us short of all the money we really need to raise to deal with things like property tax reform and education, because someone making $1 million a year is taxed at the same rate as someone making 10, 20, 30, or $50 million a year. So we built a lot of progressivity in from where we were in 1991, but there's more to do. Obviously, other things for the creation of the state earned income tax credit for the working poor that we were able to pass in 2011, the abolition of the death penalty in 2012, working with Governor Malloy on those, the healthcare reform initiatives that Senator Fasano and I worked on between 2014 and 2018, and then with Governor Lamont in office, the paid family and medical leave bill, the standardization of the minimum wage with indexing, and then last year another major initiative on creating an endowment fund for early childhood education. So those are some of the highlights over the years.
I want to point out the length of your career and how long it spans, because the tax cut is a perfect way to think about that. 1991, you guys work on the state income tax. In 2024, I'm working here at Connecticut Public, and we're talking about the largest tax cut in 2024 since 1991. That's 33 years. You were a pillar in both of those conversations. Let's talk about some other things that have happened in recent years. We've had police reform. There's things that you all have done with State Senator Len Fasano on the other side when there was a tie. That's right. The state legislature used to be made up quite entirely differently. It was 18-18 with Democrats and Republicans. Now the margin is much wider for Democrats here. But you all did some work on the Medicare front and also in terms of healthcare initiatives. And now you're trying to, I guess, preserve healthcare from federal cuts. So can we talk about some of the things that you're proud of in recent years, or some focuses that you've had in recent years?
Well, one of the things that I'm pleased is that we had the resources last fall working with Governor Lamont to create a mitigation fund to deal with federal cuts of $500 million. And that I think is beneficial to us. There's about $330 million left in that fund. It would be up to the governor to make proposals, which the General Assembly leadership could reject if they chose. But many other states are facing some of the same constraints and cuts that we are, but we're actually in a better position than many states because we have this fund for mitigation. But again, the initial focus of that was concern about the loss of SNAP benefits. We're still worried about that to some extent because there are some who won't be able to meet the requirement or volunteering requirements to continue those benefits, and they will lose them. So there are many other areas where federal cuts, especially in healthcare, the loss of the Affordable Care Act subsidies, these are all things that we're worried about as policies of the Trump administration and withdrawing support from the states.
You don't need me to tell you that it's a politically divisive time on the federal level, certainly, but even in the state. Can you share some words of wisdom that you would have for your colleagues or any future cohort of political leaders about to work across the state?
Well, I think right now we are in an unusual position where the states have to be examining their own resources and what they can do under the 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution that does reserve certain powers to the states. The 10th Amendment says that any powers that are not explicitly granted to the federal government or explicitly prohibited to be exercised at the state level are reserved for the states or the people. And since we're under attack in so many ways from the Trump administration, I think we are going to have to rely, at least in areas of public health and public safety, under our state police powers to try to protect our rights and liberties at the state level.
Where might that come up?
Well, it might. I think it'll come up in terms of the way we interact with ICE and other federal law
Hmm.
enforcement. We passed a bill in the recent session, which the governor signed recently, Senate Bill 397, which will provide that federal law enforcement should be subject to some of the same rules that state and municipal law enforcement are subject in terms of identifying themselves, not wearing masks, wearing identifiable badges, and not making arrests without having judicial warrants in certain protected spaces like courthouses, churches, synagogues, schools, other protected locations. We know that the federal government is challenging that already, as they're asserting that that's a violation of the federal supremacy clause in the Constitution. We believe it's not, because we believe that under the 10th Amendment, those kinds of decisions can be made at the state level to protect civil liberties and protect against constitutional abuses that may be committed by federal officials acting within the states.
I'm not trying to get you in trouble here. You're so effective in trying to help me identify this. Who's the change agent? Is it a political leader? Maybe some would say as a demagogue, like a President Donald Trump, or is it more of some kind of external factor, like maybe economic success or maybe lack thereof in recent years? What is so responsible for the political polarization? Is there something on the local level that's contributing to polarization? What do you think?
Well, I think so much of it is emanating from Washington and the approach that President Trump takes on so many issues, sort of polarizing, but also being so mercurial and doing things in a way that doesn't reflect a lot of advanced planning, and everyone is then scrambling to react to the next bombshell. So I think that affects policy all the way down the line.
You said that you noticed that some of your Republican colleagues face pressure right now to become more aligned with the MAGA movement. We're seeing that certainly nationally. After we're live here today, but as the live show happens, it comes right after a runoff in Texas where you have Ken Paxton defeat John Cornyn, who's been in the Senate for a while. And a lot of people point to that as a change, at least in terms of how things are happening in the right, that maybe it's getting more further right, maybe more towards this MAGA movement. So can you talk more about that, at least what some of these lawmakers and the pressure that they might face locally here?
Well, I think in Connecticut, frankly, I was surprised a few years ago to see that Leora Levy, whose main credential was having been a Trump supporter and Trump fundraiser, was able to win a U.S. Senate primary over a highly well-credentialed candidate, Themis Claridis. So it seemed to me that sort of MAGA Trump allegiance was taking hold in Connecticut as it has in other states. But historically, I think it's true that President Trump seems to have greater control and influence over his own party than any other president of either party has had in modern history, and the authority to or the power to be able to punish people in primaries. I think the only way to possibly overcome that at some point for Republicans who want to be of a more independent or moderate approach would be for some of those Republicans that he targets to run as independents, even if they lose the Republican nomination, and to try to reestablish their own brand. Otherwise, it is rather surprising what he did in Texas, and even what he did recently in Indiana with a group of state senators who he arranged to have them defeated in primaries because they wouldn't go along with his plan to redistrict the state.
Hey, we had a call from somebody in your neck of the woods. We had a call from Kimberly from New Haven, who pointed out that you've been a supporter of putting environmental rights into the state constitution. And I guess she wants to hear from you what you could do here after you leave the legislature. I know you're not going to go too far, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. But what recommendations do you have for people to preserve the climate here in future years?
Well, I think, again, that's going to be the responsibility of the states to do as much as they can, because at least while the Trump administration in office, it seems to be bent on rolling back a lot of the environmental initiatives that were taken under Democratic presidential administrations, the Biden and Obama administration. So obviously, states cannot act as effectively as the federal government can in terms of sweeping reforms that will actually affect climate change nationally. But within our own purview, we have to be alert to what we can do to encourage alternative energy sources and things of that nature, recognizing that if when we don't have a partner in the federal government, the success that we can expect will be limited.
What comes next for you? I said you wouldn't go too far. What do you think? You got a lot to do here from what we were talking about
I'm only going to be
earlier.
partially retired because I intend to keep practicing law with my law partner, Jack Keyes, as long as he wants to keep the office open. And then also I wanted to do more adjunct teaching as I teach now at Quinnipiac Law School and in the under the political science department at Quinnipiac University and the criminal justice program at the University of New Haven. So I intend to do more of that.
What a boon for the University of New Haven and Quinnipiac University. You're all over the academic calendar there, as it were. And as you prepare to leave office, I want to finish off this way. Are you feeling worried about democracy, or are you hopeful? Just give us some words here at the end of the road here in terms of state lawmaking.
Well, I believe that the states are a beacon of hope right now in many ways. I'm really terrified at what's happening at the national level because many things we took for granted in terms of constitutional principles and protections seem to be, swept aside by President Trump, and he's marginalized the Congress in a lot of ways, and that's frightening.
Is it the governor that's got to be somebody who's the leader here? Or is it going to be state lawmakers? Is it going to be the people? Who's going to lead the states here at times where you're talking about them being a beacon of hope? Who's the change agent, I guess?
Well, there obviously have to be strong Democratic governors to take the lead in this area, but you also need leadership in the legislative level as well.
From Connecticut Public Radio, this is the Wheelhouse. I'm Frankie Graziano. Tremendous career for Martin Looney, Connecticut Senate President Pro Tem, leaving the state legislature after 23 terms in office. Thank you, Senator, for being here today.
Thank you so much. Great to be with you this morning.
And thank you for working with Connecticut Public all these years to get out the news. We appreciate you very much.
Absolutely.
After the break, we're going to hear from another longtime state lawmaker not seeking re-election this year, Republican Senator Tony Wong. He'll reflect on his years representing Fairfield and what he thinks public service should look like in a divided political climate. Stick with us. This is the Wheelhouse from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. We're talking with Connecticut lawmakers today about what it takes to work across the aisle in 2026. We just heard from outgoing Connecticut Senate President Pro Tem Martin Looney. Now we hear from Republican State Senator Tony Wong. Wong recently announced that he will also not seek re-election in the fall after almost 2 decades in the state legislature. He joined us last week for a conversation recorded at our Fairfield University studio. He reflected on his tenure, legacy, and where he hopes politics is headed next. Senator, so good to have you on here today.
It's so great to be on with you as well, Frankie. Thank you for having me.
Elected to the state legislature in 2008, I should say, and have spent nearly 2 decades representing Connecticut's 28th district. You recently announced that you wouldn't seek re-election. What led you to that momentous decision, Senator?
Well, I think the first thing is nearly 20 years of service is one of the greatest honor and privilege that I will ever have. And to have the public entrust their vote and their representation to me is a remarkable honor. And to be the first Asian American to be elected to our Connecticut State Senate, which has a history back into the 1600s, is another point of legacy that I'm extremely proud of as a role model and as a representative of the impact and the contributions of other Asian Americans. But I think ultimately it really is about public service. And so for me, public service is not a lifetime, guaranteed into the position. And I think there's an opportunity to be able to move on, fulfill different roles, but to be able to contribute continuously.
Is there a piece of legislation or maybe an effort that you were most proud of?
I think as a very, very proud Connecticut Republican that believes in fiscal restraint and accountability, but also balanced with a sense of social responsibility, is a mantra that I've always practiced. And it can be a delicate balance. It should not be all or nothing one way or the other. But I think ultimately for us, We are a representative of the voices of the people in the 28th Senate District, and it's an incredible honor, and it is a unique setting of public service in Connecticut and the Connecticut General Assembly. So I hope to have done it in a respectful and a statesman-like manner, but ultimately it is service, and I'm grateful for it. And I'll close by simply thanking my family, who's tolerated nearly 20-plus years of endless meetings and overnight debates. Our family deserves tremendous, tremendous support for anybody who's running for public office.
I laughed in a moment of levity, but that is rather serious, a serious task to take on when you enter a family with a lawmaker like yourself. And it does take a lot from the family to make this work. So I imagine you'll be very happy to spend some time with your family, some more time here.
We are. My wife of 39 years is up for sainthood. But that being said, it is hard work. It is a tremendous commitment. But I'll leave you with this, Frank. Not a moment goes by where I would ever complain. I ran for office. I'm privileged to serve. People have entrusted me to be their voice. So those 20-hour debates and those long nights, those meetings and on weekends and all that, you know what? Never, ever a begrudgment. It's a privilege.
As I understand, I think your daughter's even taken part in some of the campaign messages over the time. How big's your immediate family? Who's in your immediate family?
My wife, my best friend for nearly over 40 years, our two children, our daughter and son. They're fantastic people. So I will say to you, when I talk about great accomplishments and being in elected office, a greater one is that our children are good people. They're thoughtful people. They're kind people. And you know what? They are present and engaged in our lives. It's one of the greatest gifts. But I always know this. You know, when you talk about politics and being a state senator role, one of the things I'll always remember is my wife is the king of the house. And the kids know it, and they love her dearly. So I know my role. So
she's going to be a saint. She's a king as well. There's a lot to fulfill when you are the significant other of a lawmaker. But you said you got two kids. So being a father, do you think that shaped the way that you approached public service in any way?
Absolutely. So for my daughter, it was about women's choice. And when the overturn of Roe versus Wade occurred, we had the conversation where it wasn't just a changing the law. It was a changing of a way of life that their generation and generations before understood and believed that they had equality. So it wasn't just purely political. It was an understanding of a generational shift. Another part that our children brought forth upon me is environmental sustainability, that it's important for us as policymakers to make the necessary decisions and the investment to ensure that our environment, climate change initiatives that will impact future generations are important in what we do now. But I think ultimately it really is about keeping it real where you're not kind of just in a silo and you only hear senator this, senator that. You're like, Dad, I wouldn't do it that way. Or you get feedback and humility. I think there's no doubt for us to be in that role as a state senator. We're extremely competitive. We have strong opinions and policy. But to have that bit of humility is critically important. And I'm really glad you asked that, because listening to the people that we represent with contrasting viewpoints is really a long-lost policy and art that is missing in our current political environment.
I asked this because you brought up Roe versus Wade. What about in terms of DEI policy and stuff like that? I really wanted to get your thought on this. You know, being a Connecticut Republican, what are your thoughts sort of on the national effort to sort of do away with the way that we've talked about race over the last 10 to 20 years in America?
Well, I think it's interesting because we just had a conversation in which we were at a different locale, and someone said to me, I never saw you as a Asian American and a minority because you're always so present. You're so engaged and so much a part of the fabric of what you represent. Never saw you as Asian American. And my feedback was, it's because you've never been in our shoes. You've never seen the bigotry, the subtle racism, the subtle biases. And for me, as an Asian American, one of my high school thesis was about being the model minority, the kind of perception of being highly accomplished but lacking athletics and the biases of a grouping. Even though it is a positive one, it still lumps people into a stereotypical group. So one of the feedbacks I gave him was, you don't live in my shoe. But for me, I've never had it as a weight. And I think one of the things you talk about DEI program, it really is about empowerment. It is really about equal opportunity and leveling the playing field of historical biases. You know, one of the things I remind people, we just saw something about the railroad connection, that famous photo of the meeting of the two segments in the last in the railroad system and out in the West. And the history was to have so many Asian Americans work on that monumental project. But that final photo, there's not one single Asian American. I pointed that out. And I think the other part is understanding why I got involved in public policy is my senior thesis was on Korematsu versus the United States, which is the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. We need to understand that racial bias, racial perception, and maybe innocent misunderstanding or formed by William Randolph Hearst back in those days of the Yellow Peril, it's important. So for me, one of the accomplishments I had was to be able to create some policy regarding education, academics, of Asian American studies, understanding the role of Asian Americans' input in Americans' fabric, but also have Holocaust and genocide education to understand. My favorite quote has always been from William Santayana, the famous quote that those who do not remember their history are condemned to repeat it.
And yet there is some effort, at least within the federal government and some lawmakers in different states, to end that kind of curriculum that you talked about.
No doubt. And I think DEI and the approaches that you talked about, state mandate policy, but I think it is also about the role of media. It is also about the role of engagement. And it goes back to the basic fundamentals I talked about, the changing and the challenging environment that we have right now. We've resorted back to labels. We do not have that interaction, the local input, and that perspective. So whether it's on race, whether it's on orientation or religion or political parties, we have taken a very easy way through the proliferation and algorithmic, the incredible power of algorithmic social media and targeting, is that people no longer look at individuals individually, and it's much easier to just look at labels. Oh, he's a Republican, he's a Democrat, he's Asian, and there's a bias. We've kind of gone back in simplifying the review process of saying, oh, they're this, rather than getting to know the unique individual that everyone is entitled to and offer. We've lost that kind of creativity, but also a greater understanding of differences of opinion. I think if there's nothing else people will say about my career is he may disagree with you, but he's never disagreeable. And that comes from respecting the institution that is the state Senate. We may fight, we may compete, and we may challenge each other, we may disagree, but never disagreeable to the point of personal attacks. I hope not. But unfortunately, the political environment right now is about personal attacks. It is about labeling and insinuation and a perception. And make no mistake about it, the national politic and the loss of representation from our national leaders, and for those few brave ones that have stood up to represent their people, we've now gone into silos where they're being punished. The latest case is Representative Massey in Kentucky, who stood up against some of the policies that he disagreed with within his party and the national leadership, and he got punished for it. He lost his seat. But nevertheless, imagine somebody that's served and been in political office, what happens to the people that would consider public service that never, ever step up? Goes back to what I said. Representation needs to evolve. Representation needs to have people engage in it, believe in it. But unfortunately, what we're seeing in a climate, not only good people who stood on principle and independence struggling within their own party, but also you kind of discourage, if and not close the gate on good people engage in civic and public service for the greater good.
I got to ask you what comes next. Do you imagine staying involved in public life in some way?
You can never, ever stop. I mean, for me, I'm retiring from the state Senate and the Connecticut General Assembly. It's one phase. But look, I love Connecticut. I love the town of Fairfield and the surrounding area. We live in one of the greatest states in this country. But do we have challenges? Absolutely. Economic development, environmental sustainability, race dynamics, traffic congestion, housing density, housing affordability. You don't just stop and walk away if you've been so engaged. So again, I'm retiring from the state Senate, but I'll always be a voice. As my wife said over the dinner table, she says, you can't help yourself. You have strong opinions, and I don't want to be the only one listening to it because it's a short dinner. And so, again, to answer your question, I'll always be involved, always have a voice, and things that matter to me matter to the people that I am engaged with. I'll always engage in service, but not driving up to Hartford. I can tell you it's something I won't miss, the traffic and the late nights. But no, I want to be involved in serving my community, either as a nonprofit, either into academics to teach a younger generation the things that we talk about, or just being on a local level, helping my neighborhoods and my community. We've lived in Fairfield for over 30 plus years. We love the town of Fairfield, and maybe there is a role for me within the town to be able to bring the experience and the perspective of policy as well as how we conduct ourselves in public and as role models. Maybe there's a role for me down in the town that I live, and it's a lot shorter commute.
State Senator Tony Hwang, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Frankie, thanks for having me.
Yeah, Tony, how Connecticut is it that when you factor in a decision like that, the traffic really matters as to whether or not you're going to leave the state Senate? Wow, that's a tremendous thing to talk about. And, of course, a great interview that we just had with Tony Hwang. We're so grateful for him to come on the show. From Connecticut Public, this is The Wheelhouse. I'm Frankie Graziano. After the break, we're going to hear from former Senate Republican leader Len Fasano. He's worked alongside both Senator Martin Looney and Senator Tony Hwang for years under the Golden Dome in Hartford. We'll ask him about what's changed legislating in the state and what lessons today's lawmakers can learn from the past. Questions on what you heard so far? Hit us up, 888-720-9677, 888-720-9677. You're listening to The Wheelhouse on Connecticut Public. This is The Wheelhouse from Connecticut Public. I'm Frankie Graziano. Longtime lawmakers, Senator Martin Looney and Senator Tony Hwang, are preparing to leave office. We just heard from both of them today about how they've approached their service during politically polarized times. Now we're joined by a former lawmaker who spent years negotiating alongside them at the state capitol during some pivotal moments in Connecticut politics. Len Fasano is a former Republican leader in the Connecticut General Assembly. He joins me now. Len, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Folks, you could weigh in quickly. Is bipartisanship still possible in politics? Let us know what you think. Hey, we just heard from two lawmakers, State Senator Len Fasano, who've had long careers in Connecticut State Senate. And I know how well you worked with Martin Looney for 20 years during your time in office. What was that like? I know we were able to talk about this in a previous episode a little bit, but just help us understand why it was important for you and Senator Looney to have a relationship.
Well, Marty and I have known each other for a long time. We were friends before we were legislators, and then Marty went in the legislature much earlier than I did. But, The idea is to be able to have conversations and find those points that you can agree on and those points that you cannot agree on. And I've always felt, particularly when I became leader, is that we need to move business. We need to do what's best for the state of Connecticut. And those issues we agree on, we work together on. Those that we don't, he's the majority leader, so he puts the bill forward and we'll put our amendments. And we know we could count the votes in the Senate. We knew we were going to lose. But nevertheless, we would get our points across the best we can. And that's what the debate process is bringing ideas forward.
Can you point to one particular time? I want to look at 1818 when you all were deadlocked in 2017, and you have to work, and you're obviously trying to work. You've got Governor Malloy at the time, but can you help us understand sort of one thing where you all were trying to, maybe it was trying to hammer out rules or something like that? Just help us understand working together at that process.
There's a couple of things I want to say about the 1818 tie. So there are 36 state senators. We were 1818. Lieutenant Governor breaks the tie. One of the things immediately was, I'm not really a minority leader, so what do you call me? And Marty was gracious enough to say, you are going to be the co-president of the Senate. Now, he didn't have to do that because if there was a vote, Lieutenant Governor would side with him and I wouldn't have that title. But Marty felt it was important for that title to be bestowed upon me, and I'll not forget that. And I might argue that at the time, Marty had a kidney transplant. And right about the time that all this was taking place, the day after his kidney transplant, we ran into some bumps in the roads on the rules that our two staffs couldn't work with. Marty called me from his bed, literally the day after. And we just talked it out and we worked it out because that's the type of guy he is. So I think with 1818 tie, could have been a mess. But I think Marty and I, because of the trust we have for each other, did it the right way. And I think that talks about the budget. The first budget that was put forward was Marty's budget. It didn't pass. Some Democrats didn't vote for it. And then for 9 months, Marty's staff and my staff, we actually kicked the governor out of the room. We actually kicked Governor Malloy out of the room. And it was Marty's staff and my staff sat, and we had these unbelievable conversations where you think we were miles apart on issues. But when you got down to the brass tacks and you took away all of the noise, we found out we had a lot of common ground. And that's why we have a budget that's still, for the most part, in play today. If you remember, before the 2017 bipartisan budget, Connecticut faced surpluses and deficits, tax increases, fee increases of tremendous proportions. After this bipartisan budget, we've had surpluses and we reduced debt. Now, unfortunately, there's some new legislators up there who don't remember the bad days of the bad budgeting. They're trying to undo what we did. And, if you don't remember history, you're bound to repeat it. And I hope we don't go backwards. But nevertheless, for over 10 years, well, just about 10 years now, this budget has done Connecticut extraordinarily well. And that's because Marty was willing to sit down as leader, and so are the other leaders, come to the table and sit down. Eric Zimowitz, the speaker, Themis Claridis, the House Minority Leader, we all got together and we were able to do it.
When you and Marty talk, and I'm able to see you guys talk together, or when you talk about Senator Looney, you often fondly look back at some of the initiatives that you've done with healthcare and that you've told me were modeled by other states. Can you talk about the work that you've done together or some of those phone calls that you've had?
Sure. Marty has an aide who has been in the medical system for a long time and met a lot of issues. And my father was a doctor for many years, so he always expressed to me the issues and the frustration he has had with insurance companies and getting medical coverage and him wanting to do the right thing. And the insurance company would say no. So Marty and I got together on issues like no surprise billing. You go to emergency room and there's a doctor who's out of your network, you don't get a $10,000 bill just because the doctor who's out of your network is on call that night. You get the rates that you signed up for your insurance company. So we got rid of no surprise billing. Well, that is taken off across the country. Putting prices online. So you figure out what Hartford Hospital versus Yale will charge you for a hip operation, assuming normal circumstances. So you can do some shopping as a consumer. All of that is important. Those are things we worked on over time. A lot of pushback we got, coverage for certain medicine. Um, there's a individual I went to college with whose son got a very rare disease, and like at the age of 9, or even earlier perhaps, all of a sudden this disease kicks in, and his head fell in the back seat, and he needed unbelievable state aid. He lost all ability to think, walk, talk, etc. But if you diagnose that at birth, you can cure 100% of the cases with medicine, and they leave a normal life. It took us a long time, but bipartisanly, we got it through, and we have saved countless families because people usually live to about 18 years old. My friend was a doctor, so he kept his son alive. It's called Ryan's Hope. Kept his son alive through, I think, mid-20s, maybe 30s, and then he passed away. But now we save lives with this, and it cost $100 to do this type of diagnosis to save lives. Well, that's when bipartisanship means a lot, and you get together and you say, we're going to do this because it's good policy.
And it's not trivial either, so it's really important to hear about that. I love when we talk about Ryan's Hope in that regard. Hey, can you share any reaction to Tony Hwang's decision to walk away from the General Assembly? We often talk when we get together about 2017, and I know Tony Hwang was there at that point too, but there are times that you look back fondly because of a lot of the work that you did with Themis, with Tony, with other people in the House like Joe Arasimowicz, and then, of course, Marty Looney in the Senate and Tony Hwang in the Senate, but and the governor as well. So now things have changed drastically in Connecticut for Republicans. Whose fault is that? Is that MAGA's fault? Is that Donald Trump's fault? Is that the Republicans themselves? Is the party's fault? Is it just that there's more Democrats? What are you looking at?
I look at it at the rhetoric of the politicians. And I look at it, I hate to say this, but 24-hour news. Look, some of the news items are clicks in the mouse. So if I say, and I'm making up stuff here, please, but if I say, I think Senator Looney's got this bill wrong because he doesn't understand the real import of this bill, and then that will get some news. But then if Marty says Len doesn't understand what he wrote because he can't read English, he'll get the clicks. Then I've got to say Marty's just too stupid to understand, and it goes back and forth. And that's what gets news clicks. I mean, the most outrageous things, true or not, is what we hear on the news. So
I'm looking at all the degrees behind you. I got to say this. Yes. People can't see this, right? But because we're doing audio only today, but you're an incredibly accomplished senator. We don't need to go through it, but I bring this up because you've said this a couple of times to me, and we've had these conversations. I don't know how many lawmakers have the kind of credentials that you do, that Senator Looney does, that Senator Hwang do. So maybe when we're in 24-hour news, I'm involved in news as well here. Maybe some of the people that are saying this rhetoric have changed. Maybe they don't have the kind of accomplishments that you do. Maybe we have to do it because they're saying crazy things. I don't know.
It could be part of it, and it could be the culture. But Marty and I always believed, and a lot of the legislators I think I served with when I was there, that the institution matters more. You have to respect the look. I would argue with Governor Malloy a lot, but I joke with him too. For his birthday, I gave him a birthday cake because one time he had a quote and said, "Senator Fasano wants his cake and eat it too." So on his birthday, I brought him a cake, and I took a piece out of the cake and I wrote on it, "Here's your cake, but I had to have my piece too." But and he called me up and he laughed about it. But that's okay. We could argue about policy all day long. But you respect the chair, no matter what it is. You have to, because if we don't, as politicians, we can't expect people to respect the chair, which means we can't expect people to respect me or Marty or the governor. And I don't agree with everything that passed in the Senate, and I have issues with some of the bills when I was there that passed, but I respect the process Because if I don't show respect, then my constituents don't show respect. And that's not the right place to be. And that's where we are now. There's no respect for authority. There's no respect for people. When the Supreme Court comes out with a decision and says it's on your side, you tell them how brilliant they are. They come out with a decision that's against you, you say how demagogue they are. We can't do that. That's my view.
I'm going to ask you about two questions here in the next 3 minutes here as we finish up. The first one I want to get out of the way here is, as we mentioned, we talk about how the state legislature used to look different. What advice do you have for Republicans to turn it around?
I think Republicans every place have to tone down their rhetoric. I think they can't be no's. You have to have alternative ideas. You want to be a no, that's fine, but then show a different way of doing it. Whatever the policy is, if there's a change and you recognize there be a change and you don't like the way they change, have an alternative. You may lose on the floor on the amendment, but the point is you have an issue you're bringing up. Being a party and no doesn't help. You need to have conversation.
You've been out of office for a few years now. You work at Fasano, Ippolito, and Lee, which gives you a little distance from day-to-day politics, but maybe not too far as we keep talking to you on the show here. From your perspective, what concerns you most about the current political climate in Connecticut, and what still gives you hope?
I think what I'm concerned about is lack of conversation. I think I'm concerned of lack of discipline for lawmakers to really understand an issue. Not just read what's on Capitol Report or listen to what's on news, really get down and understand the issue and dissect it and come up with plans or alternatives. I think our job is, as legislators, is to find disorder and bring order. That's how I view what a legislator is supposed to do. And you got to think how you're going to bring that order. And the order may not be exactly the way you want it, but your obligation is to find that order. And laws are only as good as people will accept them, and they change with society. What is laws 30 years ago are not laws today, and society doesn't want them to be laws today. So you need to move with society. You need to have an ear to the ground. And I don't think enough people do their homework or understand an issue as thoroughly as they should. And I just wish people would. That would be my hope for the future. Do I have hope that's going to happen? Yes, I'm hoping that this divisiveness on both sides of the aisle, no one's to blame, comes from both, ends at some point, and we get back to doing the people's business.
That's Len Fasano, former Republican member of the Connecticut State Senate. Len, it was so great to have you on the Wheelhouse this morning.
Thank you. Look forward to coming back.
Yeah, can't wait to talk to you again soon. Thank you so much for coming on. What a tremendous show. 80 years of experience between Senator Fasano, Senator Looney, and Tony Wong, and somebody that Connecticut Public and the state of Connecticut have leaned on for quite some time. Thank you so much. Today's show produced by Chloe Wynn, edited by Patrick Scahill. Our technical producer, Eugene Amertruda. We thank you so much to Isaac Moss, Tess Terrible, Megan Fitzgerald, Bradley O'Connor, Megan Boone, Dylan Reyes, Sam Hockaday, the rest of the crew here. Download the Wheelhouse anytime on your favorite podcast app. I'm Frankie Graziano. This is the Wheelhouse. Thank you for listening.